yeah, last talk of the day until everyone gets to the after party or whatever. So yeah, let's talk about a little bit about monetization. And yeah, so just before I get started, I want to really quickly ask, like, how many of you, let's show of hands, has implemented in-app purchases or subscriptions in their app? Can you just raise your hand if you've done that? All right, how many of you love that experience? All right, yeah. And how many have you used RevenueCat to do it? Okay, I will be talking to you after this to understand why you didn't love that experience. No, just kidding. So as I said, we're going to talk about monetization. So what that means, we're first going to start with why monetization is quite hard on Android specifically. Then we're going to look at like what kind of different monetization options you have for Android. In this case, we're going to be focusing on ones that bring in recurring revenue. So not, for example, just putting a price on your app and therefore charging that for it. We're going to talk about the ads, the consumables, subscriptions, and then this thing called virtual currencies, which is a bit of a newer thing. Then I'm going to mention you why you should probably use RevenueCat instead of building this yourself. I'm going to show you how to use the SDK, how that works, and we're going to go through the whole in-app purchase process by doing this. Last time, briefly going to mention about web billing, so how you can actually, let's say, circumvent the 15 to 30% commission that Google and Apple, for example, like to take by doing it somewhere else other than the mobile app. But before we get into all that, so my name is Perttu Lähteenlahti. The reason for the needlessly complex and a difficult name is the fact that I'm from Finland, and also because my parents thought that it would be very fun to have a kid whose name is never correct, not even in his passport. And I work as a developer advocate at RevenueCat, so I help developers to understand our SDK better. I write tutorials, I give talks, basically get you to, if you've already considered monetizing your app, take the last step to monetizing it, and if you're struggling with having monetized your app, also to do that, how to grow and whatnot. I'm mainly only on one social media, that's Twitter or X or whatever you call that. You can find me from there. The QR code that takes you to my website where you have a bunch of articles also related to in-app purchases and subscriptions, and you can also find my almost non-existent socials from there. Yeah, so first, why monetization is hard? There's few ways of looking at this, actually. One is that what is especially common on Android is that people don't really like to pay for apps. They don't like to pay for things in general. And like a year ago, we collected from different developers the one-star reviews that they had gotten. And like this one was one of them. So developer got greedy and made features that used to be free, paid. So 1 star. And it's an interesting sentiment because in a way they really like the app. They just don't like paying for it. So it's always kind of an uphill battle in how do you convince your customer or your user to become a customer and pay for the things that you've built. And why would you want them to pay? Well, that's simply because if you get a little bit of money for that, you probably can then use that money for something that you need for living, for eating, whatever. So in a way, it's a way to pay for the time that you put into building something app. So you could see it as a transaction of passion. Like they're very passionate about using your app, just not willing to pay, and you're very passionate about building your app, but you can't live on pure passion. This applies for both of you. But there's also other things. So when it comes to monetizing, it's just not about flipping a switch and suddenly you have monetization in your app. No, you actually, if you have subscriptions or anything more complex, you probably need a backend. You have to start maintaining that. You have to take care of like validating receipts, checking the subscription state, checking, for example, if a user gets a new device, maybe you need an authentication already, and you end up building a lot of things that are away from the core functionalities of your app. Which of course then makes it that you start to consider, do I actually want to add subscriptions to my app or whatever. This becomes even more complex when you start to support more platforms than Android, like let's say iOS or even web. How do you then manage the state between all of these, that is the user subscribed or not? And on top of that, there's the thing that Apple and Google because this is a business for them. They make 15 to 30% on all of the money that goes through in-app purchases. They're constantly updating the libraries, the requirements. Then there's the European Union, for example, telling that, hey, we need this kind of thing for the purchases and whatnot. So you're constantly also required to know a lot about like how does the payments and everything work. So now you have already like the customers or your users are kind of against it. It's not really easy to do. But then on top of that, like when you look at the statistics on this, so we collected like data on subscriptions, on the data that we collect when you use the RevenueCat SDK. And on Android, the numbers are not good, at least not compared to iOS. So the top 5% of the apps on Android, like they make 400 times more than the bottom 20%. So there's a massive gap. So that means that most apps aren't doing monetization right. And the ones that are doing, they're actually getting the whole bag, basically. And on Android, there's like Android users, they're less likely to start trials than iOS users. They also convert worse than iOS. So half, only like 2.5% compared to the iOS 5%. And they also generate less revenue per install. So iOS apps, for example, make almost 3 times more. And part of this can be explained that a lot of Android apps are free and they have, for example, ads instead. But it's not really like a good thing to say. There's a lot of work to be done, and you actually have to do a really good subscription experience or monetization experience to actually get these numbers to look good. And to be there is a positive thing, of course, is that Android, if you stick over, if a customer stays with your app over a year, they're more likely to stay with it longer than that than on iOS. So that means that if you're actually building really good stuff, the iOS customers will stay as your customers, which is nice. So as you can see, there's a lot of things there. Things can, so to say, go wrong. So then the options, how you should monetize Android. First, there's the ads. Probably everyone knows how those work. One-time consumables, we're going to look at those in detail. There's the subscriptions, and then there's virtual currencies. So first, ads. Works really well if you have a lot of users. You can get a few clicks on the ads, get a few cents from every user. If you have like tens of thousands of them, good, bringing in money, like constantly, and customers are happy because they get to use the app. Like all the features of it. They're really easy to implement, but there's also the lifetime value per user is quite low, so you actually need a lot of users. If you have a user that has 100,000 users that really love it, ads won't really work in your case. And of course, then it's like the more professional your app is, the less likely you're going to put ads there probably. So they work for casual games, media, and like free utilities where you know that the brand of your app to say won't be damaged by putting ads there. Then there's the consumables. That used to be a really big thing when App Store launched or App Stores launched. So instead of like you download a free app and you pay for something one time. I'm not only mentioning the consumables, there's also the non-consumable. The difference between those two is that consumable, after you purchase it, you have to consume it. So that usually means that you, for example, in games where you buy tokens or you buy extra lives or whatever, those are very common, consumables are very common approach in mobile games. Less likely to be used in like actual apps and utility apps. And then you have the non-consumable. So user purchases it once, and it stays with them until they stop using the app, or where even if they uninstall it and install again, they can actually get the non-consumable back. That could be, for example, having a dark mode that you need to pay to unlock a dark mode in your app. You sometimes still see that kind of approach, but it's getting less and less common. Mainly because it doesn't bring recurring revenue, unlike the consumables does. And then there's also one thing that is not mentioned here. You could also do consumables in such way that you have a tip jar or whatever that support the developer. Buy them a pizza. That could be a consumable. So then the customer user can buy your pizzas for you to continue developing. But most of the time you're actually going to be looking at these. So subscriptions, you get the recurring revenue. So you have monthly, yearly, even weekly subscriptions. I don't remember statistics how likely it is on Android for people to pay for a weekly subscription, but on iOS it's actually becoming a very common pattern. So you bring the price down, but you just charge the user every week. Very good for like productivity, lifestyle, and software as a service apps where you know that you need the money in order to run your backend services or provide customer support. They're also quite predictable. There's an easier like commitment from the user because they know that, okay, I'm signing up for 1 year. This works very well in health apps where users are way likelier than on any type of app to be subscribing for 1 year. And that's the same thing with like gyms, for example, that if you're thinking of starting a gym, you're probably going to think that, okay, I'm going to enroll at least a year because this is going to be my new habit. So health apps work like that. Other apps, users usually require a shorter subscription time. But then there's of course the problem that because users are constantly paying for the service, you actually need to provide value every week, every month, or eventually they'll just stop using it because of that. And then there's a new feature that we've launched called virtual currencies. This has nothing to do with cryptocurrencies, although we can say that this is a way to have your own in-app economy. So as I mentioned on the consumables, when you have a game with like in-app currency, like coins or whatever, you can use our virtual currencies to also do that, to power that. But you could also do this like with modern machine learning apps. So let's say that you build a Studio Ghibli app to Ghiblify your photos or whatever. The way you want to like plan that pricing on that is probably not to sell them consumables and take care that the consumable has been used and whatnot by yourself and maintain a backend for that. Instead, you could just use our virtual currencies for that, give them like 50 image generations when they pay $5, and calling our backend to deduct those currencies or those generations as user uses the image generations. And we're really flexible with this, so you can actually tie this to both subscriptions and consumables. So you could have a monthly subscription, which grants you 500 image generations. And on top of that, if the user requires, for example, more image generation, more coins, whatever, you can sell consumables, so 100 coins or 100 credits on top of that. So hopefully that all makes sense, and it's something that worth considering. So then why use RevenueCat? Why not just build all of this by yourself? Well, we talked about already like what it takes, or why it's actually quite difficult to build subscriptions, because you have to maintain a backend and take care of receive validation. We actually take care of all of that, and we have an SDK for Kotlin, Flutter, and, well, to be honest, a bunch of other things, so you can monetize on any platform basically you want. iOS, Android, and web being the biggest ones. And we handle the store quirks and the validating the receipts and the data is current. And we also, on top of that, we provide all kinds of nice things like Paywall editor. I'm going to show you what paywalls mean if you've never heard that word, but that's something that you necessarily don't want to build yourself, and you also don't want to code every paywall by hand. You can also run experiments and run analytics and whatnot with the stuff that we've included. And it's free to get started. So until $2,500 a month, you're not paying anything, except, of course, to Apple and Google, you're paying the commission that they take. But when you start making over that, we charge you 1% of the revenue that you track through our SDK. And we have a really nice web dashboard where you can actually see all of the trials and active subscriptions that your app has and keep track of. So it's real time in most cases as well. So you're constantly knowing how much you're getting up. And we have a mobile app, for example, that pings you when a user subscribes, something that you don't get by default with iOS and Android, for example. So if you're really looking for that bag, you can always wake up in the morning and just look at the app and see that, okay, I made, I don't know, $50 last night, which is probably the best way to wake up, at least if you don't count waking up with an alarm. Working with the SDK, that's actually pretty simple. I'm going to go this in detail, but the main 3 steps are first initializing the SDK. We do this at the app start. We identify the customer. I'm going to talk a little bit what that means in practice. Then you're going to do a purchase or subscription, either by calling our API for purchasing directly, or using a paywall, or in a case where a user is, for example, has uninstalled the app and is returning back to use the app, they can also restore the purchase. And once they've done that purchase, in step 3, we grant them an entitlement, which is our term for basically checking if the user is eligible to access parts of your app. So how to initialize the SDK? For example, in Kotlin, you call it on the onCreate. You have to only give it a public API key that you get from the dashboard, and that's it. That's the simplest setup. If your app doesn't have user profiles, doesn't have an ID, user ID or anything like that, that's the only thing you need to do. The problem with this is that if user now uninstalls the app and comes back, installs the app again, they will not actually have the subscription. So, or if they bought that. In order to get that back, they need to do the restore purchases profile. And also, if they were to change from Android to iOS for some reason, or the vice versa, because we sign anonymous user ID every time you initialize the SDK for the first time at the app start, we have no way of connecting those. So if you have user IDs, what you can do is you can pass your own custom user ID, one that is not guessable, so it shouldn't be, for example, an email of the user or anything like that, during the initialization phase. And the nice thing about this is that if you start with an account, or if your user starts using your app, and let's say that at that point you don't have an authentication, but you add that later, our SDK is smart enough that when you call it with the new user ID, it knows that, okay, this is actually the same user that was anonymous before, so I'm just going to combine these 2, and now you have data also from the time when you hadn't yet built the authentication or you didn't know who the customer was. And you don't have to then take care of if they now change phone, or they start using your app on web, for example, because we have an SDK for that as well. You can just call the customer info and check that, okay, this user is this user and they are eligible for these purchases. So, but that's initializing. Then how do you actually do the purchasing part? For that, we have to go through a few terms. So we have the products. That means subscriptions, consumables. And then we have things called offerings, which we use to group those products together. And then we have paywalls, which we use to show the offerings, and entitlements, instead to check what the user is actually eligible to do in the app. This will all make sense because I'm going to go through all of them individually. So first, offerings. As you mentioned, you can have multiple subscription products. You can have a monthly subscription, you can have a yearly subscription. You can collect all of those into a single offering, which also then includes like this. If you have 2 platforms, you have iOS and Android, you can have monthly on Android, monthly on iOS. They're all part of the same offering. And you can then do A/B testing. You can create a different offering that has different products with different price points, which allows you to then do A/B testing which one of those performs better. Are users more willing to pay for monthly or weekly subscription, for example? And you can then make decisions on that, based on that, to which offering. And our APIs allow you to change these on the go, so you don't have to make new releases. The way we show these, the most common common way to show different offerings is using paywalls. So using paywalls literally means having a wall between the customer, the user, and the content in the app, which they should not access unless they've paid for it. You can do all kinds of different paywalls. You can show different offers there. You can show different offerings there, and different pricing experiments, so to say. And we actually have a paywall builder in the web UI. I'm going to show a screenshot of it, that you can then build these paywalls without writing a single line of code. And you can easily create like multiple of these to test it for different types of users. You can even target like a specific type of customer in a specific country with a specific paywall to see if that's the best way to get them to convert into a paying customer. Our paywall editor looks like this, so it's like what you see is what you get editor. Easy to build and test, and although it's a web-based, everything that you build here is rendered natively. So it's not a web view, for example, that we show in the app or anything like that, but it's actual Kotlin code, like through Android native code that we show the components as. And they're very easily customizable. When you push the changes live, the user just needs to refresh the app, like launch it again, if they haven't done that already, and they will have the most updated. So you don't even have to make new releases with the in order to update paywalls. And there's multiple ways of showing the paywalls. By default, we show them in full screen, but you can of course do that as a modal as well. You can use either activities to do it or just like Jetpack Compose. One of the most common ways is to use the paywall dialog, either with a custom logic or then when you tie it to an entitlement. When we tie it to an entitlement, that means essentially that we define that user needs to have entitlements, or they need to be eligible, for example, pro entitlement. If they don't, then the paywall is like instantly presented to them, and they can't continue using the app unless they pay for it. Most cases you probably don't want that. You actually want something more complex. For example, that the user is able to access some parts of the UI, take a look and try some of the features, and then you show them the paywall. In terms of code-wise, you can see here there's the launch paywall activity that is in this case based on an entitlement ID. So you can see that it says requirement entitlement identifier. You define that, okay, user has to have at least the pro level in order to not get this. If they have something else, then they get the paywall. And you can have multiple different paywalls, multiple different entitlements, which I'm going to talk soon. But it can't really get more simpler than this to show actual paywalls in your app. And as mentioned, we have a paywall builder, but you don't have to build everything from scratch. I think we have, I think it's 30, 40, maybe even 50 different paywall templates that you can start with, and you can start customizing them to test out which ones of those work for the best for your customer. And you can also do localization on these. So if your app is available in different languages, we offer an easy way. You can even like automatically generate some of the localizations in the web UI. So it takes a lot of the pain away from you having to think about how to do the purchasing, how to do the monetization part, and how to do the paywall part, which you would have probably traditionally coded yourself by hand, which is very error prone and also often something that you don't really want to think about unless you're like really into, for some reason, thinking about what kind of things convert users into paying users. And as mentioned then, like after you purchase something, you're entitled to something, so the customer is entitled to do something with your app. For us, this is a core concept. You could also think of these like access rights to the features user is allowed to use once they've made the purchase. The reason why you want to use the entitlements instead of, for example, directly tying whatever the user is buying to the product itself. So say that you had a monthly subscription to Pro, and you have set that in Google Play console, and you check that if user has bought that exact package. What happens if you now want to add a yearly package? Now you have to make a code change in order to support the yearly package as well, that, hey, that actually also allows it. But if you're using the entitlements with RevenueCat, you just define that we have a pro level entitlement, and these 3 or 2 products like monthly and yearly both give you the pro entitlement, and you can keep the logic the same in the app. So you don't have to make any code changes at that point in order to test out new monthly packages or whatever. You can regroup them however you want, which products are shown together in which offerings. And And you can also do it so that, let's say that you have very complex monetization. You can have that. You can have a pro, or let's say maybe gold and platinum subscriptions, and you say that gold opens these entitlements, and platinum opens whatever the gold unlocked, but also in addition to that, these entitlements or these features. So you can tie it so that one purchase or one type of product opens up different type of entitlements, and user can be automatically, for example, converted. That when they convert from gold to platinum, they get the correct access to the features. And the easiest way to check if user is entitled to any of them is to call what we call the customer info function. So you call that, it provides you with the customer info, which actually contains all of the packages the user has purchased, but also what entitlements they're allowed to use. So in this case, you can see that there's the entitlement, the ID, and you're checking, is it active? If so, then they can access, for example, that view, they can access that feature, and therefore unlocking. If we quickly talk about like how you actually want to monetize your Android app, since we said that most Android users, for example, are not as willing to pay for features, the easiest way is to do a combination of the few of the methods that we talked. So for example, let's say that you have ads in your app. You could then add a pro level subscription. And when you do that, is that you purchase the pro level subscription, that removes the ads. So you could do it so that with the entitlement check, you remove the ads at that point, and user can now continue using their app. If they eventually churn out, meaning that they stop subscribing to your app, you just check the entitlements. They're no longer entitled to, because they're not paying for the monthly subscription or the yearly subscription. The entitlement shows not being active, and at that point, you can just go back to showing the ads. So that way you can easily do multi-level monetization approaches using our SDK. Then, as I mentioned, I'm briefly going to talk about how to monetize on web as well. So the reason why you would want to do this is, of course, because Google and Apple both take the same 15 to 30% discount. If you're a small business, if you're making less than 1 million a year, then you're eligible for the 15%. Some of you might know this already. But in almost every other case, you're always paying 30% of all the money that you get through in-app purchases to Apple and Google. And that's a pretty significant stake that they take. You might be aware that if you're doing subscriptions, or if you're buying digital products on the web, for example, through Stripe or Paddle as payment providers, their cut is significantly lower. We're talking about like 3-4%. And we actually support that. So we have a thing called web paywall links, where you can actually customize this web portal, build it according to your brand, and allow user to purchase a subscription, a consumable even, through that, and therefore allows you to avoid paying that cut to Apple and Google. Now you're probably thinking that, wait, I'm not allowed to put a link to this payment. That's true. So Apple and Google don't allow you to take you outside to external payment providers. They actually require that you use the in-app purchases. If you don't do that, they're gonna reject your app and say that, hey, at the in-app purchases, remove the links to outside services. So how are you actually supposed to use this? Well, there's a few ways. And in US, you could actually, because Apple lost a lawsuit concerning this, you can actually now show a button that says that save 30%, which then takes you to a web portal and where you pay, and then takes you back to the app. It might be that Google eventually has to follow the same guideline, but that's still going to be just US only. So the easiest way that actually is to do this is called redemption links in RevenueCat. So let's say that what happens is that you have an authentication, for example, in your app. So your user registers, and they give their email to you. What you can do at that point is you can send them an email that contains a link to the payment provider, the payment page, web paywall page. They pay there, and they get back an email, or even in the paywall itself, they get this link, which they click, and that actually deep links back into the app, and our SDK automatically captures that link and tells you that, okay, this purchase that was made here in the web is now tied to this user. And that way you can actually avoid it. That doesn't break any of Apple's or Google's rulings. Similarly, you can also do win-back campaigns. What those mean is that eventually every user that's subscribed for some time is going to churn out, so they're going to stop subscribing. We can capture those events. We know, because we get the server events on every purchases to RevenueCat, we know when a user unsubscribes. And you can actually automate it so that you send an automatic email to the user that, hey, we noticed that you stopped subscribing. Perhaps it was because the pricing was too high. How about we give you a discount offer that is 30% less? Here's a link. Subscribe through here, and you can get a discount. That's allowed. The reason why you can give a 30% discount in that case is, of course, because they're doing the purchase through the web billing part, not through the in-app purchases. But they will still be, because the SDK registers the subscription both from another platform payment provider, they will still be able to use it in the app itself. So to recap a bit, monetization on Android is quite hard, especially doing it right and doing it so that it doesn't make user satisfaction go up instantly. You need to choose the right model. That might be using ads, that might be using a combination of ads and subscriptions, and it could be also even more complicated topic that you have ads, you have a subscription which gets rid of the apps, and that subscription also gives you a virtual currency that you can then use to do things in the app. Play around, experiment which one of those work. You can easily see it from the dashboard, which kind of like, it could also be that you need to give a trial to the users to try out the app. Test out, you can easily do that with RevenueCat. Allow us to handle the complexity and allow us to handle all the, so to say, hard stuff about in-app purchases. But so if we do that, then you can focus on what actually matters. So building apps that are good and give the features the users actually want to use. And then monetization comes on top of that, just in a way that makes sense. And that's all I have on that, but I'm quickly going to mention, so we're running currently the world's biggest mobile hackathon. It's still going on until the end of this month. So if there's an app you've been building, I suggest you take a look at this. Our only requirement is that you have to have the RevenueCat SDK in the app, and it has to be an app that you've launched during, first time launch has been during August and the last of September. What you would like to get, maybe take part in this, that we have prizes worth $350,000. The main prize winner gets, I think it's $50,000, so it's a massive prize. We're going to also fly some of the winners to New York. We're going to show their app on the billboards there and get all kinds of positive stuff for them. Get users to see those apps, to download those apps. So just want to put that out there. Take a look at Shipathon. It's a pretty good, cool event. Also, if you now sign up, you might still get access to ShipKit, which includes all kinds of credits and whatnot for different tools that you might like using it. And yeah, that's all I have. I've been Perttu Lähteenlahti, or still I am. And if you have any questions, we have a very red booth there where I'm wearing red overalls. Come talk to me there, or come talk to me right after this presentation. Thanks.